Hello, everyone. Welcome to TNC Launch and Learn on the Agile Field Practice. This is the last one for this year for the Agile Field Practice. I'm Xiaoqiang Liu, Nature Conservancy Agriculture Conservation Practitioner. Today, we're really happy to have Dr. Steve Lyons from OSU to talk about Cascading Waterway. Steve is not just our speaker, but also he's kind of also our our partner. We work on the some project, hybrid project. Hybrid stands for Harmful Algal Bloom, a research initiative. Uh, Steve, so I try to keep the introduction brief because Steve, if I just fully introduction, let me take me 10 minutes to fully to introduce Steve. Steve, graduate from with a bachelor from Purdue University, from agriculture and biological engineering, and both master and a PhD from Cornell University with biological and environmental engineering. His research focused on hydrology. So basically, I think the interest in the interactions, basically landscape, how landscape interact with water across different spatial scales. And also his research, some innovative research focus on the characterize hydrological process, and also by understanding this process, we can better manage our resources, particularly the focus on the water quality improvement. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Steve to take the lead.
Great. Thanks, Sean. I'm going to go ahead and, thanks for that introduction. That's great. Yeah, as I always tell my mom, everything, when the water hits the ground and it moves all the way throughout to the ocean, that's what I look at. So all that type of stuff, many different things throughout my career. Cool. Today, though, we'll talk about cascading waterways. So I've got some slides to share, and I'll do that right now. And let me know if it looks okay on your end. Let me do this, and then I lost Zoom, of course. Zoom again. There it is. And I'll share my screen. Let's share that one. Great. So hopefully you see my slides now. Excellent. Thanks for the thumbs up. Great. So cool. So yeah, for those interested, I'm at Ohio State. I'm in the School of Environment and Natural Resources, and I live, and work in Worcester, Ohio at the OARDC, or the CFAES Worcester campus. So if you're ever in Worcester, feel free to look me up. As Sean mentioned, we collaborate together, the Nature Conservancy and myself and Ohio State University, and we work with ODA as well. I'm looking at cascading waterways and the efficacy and how they're working across the state of Ohio. And so that's a HABRI project, Harmful Algal Bloom Research Initiative project that we started, and we're in year 2 of that funding cycle. So today I'll cover a little bit just about cascading waterways, what they are, how they work, and things like that in theory, show some nice pictures, hopefully. And then I'll go through a little bit of that project in the back end here, some of the initial results we have as we work trying to move these edge of field or infield practices to an interim practice for the NRCS. That's our goal ultimately all along here, is to do some data collection and see how they work. Chat questions as we go along, and I'm sure we'll have some time at the end here. It's hot outside, so hopefully you're in a cool place to listen today. Let's see. Great. So we're all familiar with, just for context, grassed waterways, NRCS practice 412. So here's an image of that. So these ideas on the left, cornfield with rills, with gully erosion happening here. And on the right, then, after some grass waterways have been built, these are erosion control structures in fields, mainly to hold soil in place and to convey the water off the field in a timely manner to avoid flooding, to avoid erosion, and help reduce sediment and nutrients coming off that field to some extent. So these are, supported practices. These are, long standard traditions. These are, engineered, highly understood, well functioning. You can't drive around Ohio without seeing them in fields all over the place. Well, what we're focusing on today then are what are called cascading waterways. And here's some imagery of one in Ohio. This is in Allen County, one of the first ones built in the state. This is a conjunct project with the Nature Conservancy and some other partners. And so what cascading waterways are is they take that same grassed waterway concept here, when I mouse somewhere, here where we can see this grass waterway converging together, flowing through from right to left on this upper aerial image. And it routes that waterway through retention cells. Here's an image of a retention cell in construction on this Allen County site. And so in sequence here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 retention cells. These are literally settling basins, if you think about it that way. Some people think of these as wetlands interlaced with the waterway. The concept is that they'll cascade. So they'll create storage pods or storage areas, volumes that can hold water. And as this top one fills up, it will literally waterfall or cascade down to the next one, down to the next one, down to the next one. So increasing the storage capacity of the in-channel flow, which will allow for a couple of things. In theory, allows for sedimentation, allows for things to settle out of that water as it hangs out in that pool or that retention cells for a while. It should also promote infiltration. Water should move into the ground slowly to be remediated so that nutrients can be uptaken by the soil and by soil processes and things like that. Also, as these things mature, this is a newly constructed site. Obviously, during construction, as these things mature, they should get wetland or get vegetation in them that should promote wildlife ecology and also nutrient retention through biofilms and things like that. So in theory, this whole process should expand the ability of waterways, not just treat erosion, but also to have some nutrient retention, some nutrient treatment processes as well going on. To build these, then it's not necessarily just the same as building a waterway. It costs a little bit of extra money on top. And so this is the price tag for this Allen County example. And you can see the partners listed here on the left, including the Nature Conservancy and other agencies, looking at the photos of the before, during, and after construction for this location. And this pamphlet is available through the Conservancy, and Sean can get you a link for this one as well if you're interested in the details. But just a feeling for what the sites look like, that drainage area for that large cascading waterway system, about 70 acres, and the width across that grass waterway about 30 to 60 feet in different locations. But the cost or the main take homes here, and by and large, total cost on this project $70,000 is not necessarily free, right? So there has to be some value or some added value for having these cascading waterways. The majority of the cost for these projects then is the earthwork. It's the moving of the soil to create those retention cells or those retention basins. It's the cut and then the fill. If you talk to ODA, they'll tell you that that's the biggest issue with these types of building these structures is finding places to put the fill. Where do you spoil the fill as you dig them out, if you create these retention basins, because that determines literally the design characteristic. So if you can look at the price tag here, it's about half goes to that kind of earthworking thing, rerouting some tile and some erosion things and some planting and things like that. And of course, then for this one here, because ODA did the design on it, there's no engineering cost on this one. So that could change for more private practice type approaches. Then looking here, this is again that Allen County site is shown from the air. This is the blueprint or the site description for it here, the design. Again, here's that cut and fill trapezoidal cross section. So each of these cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, going downstream here, has to be cut out, and that spoiled land has to be spread out. So you can build this existing berm or this berm on the low end side to kind of level out the system to do that storage. But that's where the major cost is, and that actual construction and then wasting of that material. It ends up determining, from a cost benefit analysis, the amount of storage you can get, how big these cells can be. The bigger they are, the more water they could hold, right? That trades off against where the soil has to go. After you build the berms and all the construction you need around them, you end up wasting soil perhaps in the field or things like that. So figuring out where to take it, because trucking it off site would be very expensive, right? That'd be a big cost. So if you can waste it on site, that's a better way of utilizing those spoils. And that becomes problematic to create the right hydraulic gradients so the water does flow, and at the same time having enough storage as well to make these worth their while. All right. And so that Allen County site is just one of several, 8 or 9 that are cascading waterways that have been built in the past 5 years or so across the state. Most of them are in the Northwest, as you can imagine, where the agricultural production is concentrated by and large, a lot of corn, a lot of soy. So here's some imagery then from some that are in the field now. And this bottom image is that cascading waterway in Allen County more recently during this past spring when it was really, really wet conditions. And you can see again, if you look real close with your eyes and you know what you're looking for, up here, 1, 2, 3 to the 4th cell, the retention cell. You can see the vegetation here, it's still a little dead, still not greening up yet. You can actually see during this wet period, these cells are filled with water and there is cascading, this flow happening between the cells. So they're starting to connect hydrologically along that waterway. All right. And so again, this is that Allen County site, which is one of the largest sites, actually. These cells are very, very large, but all of these sites are very unique to their geographical location. We've seen across the 4 that I'll talk about in this project that we're looking at. One is this Allen County site. This has the largest actual cells in it. But then here in Seneca County, in Defiance County, at the Dara site, if you're familiar with that site where the drainage research is done, here's some cascading waterways that we're studying as well. So these ones here in Dara, for example, are very, very short. This distance from here to that tree line is not that far, and they've got 3 cascades in here with shorter waterways between them, as opposed to the Seneca County site looking upstream. There's quite far between these. As these sites mature through spring to summer, we do get a lot of grass, a lot of reedy vegetation along the outside, cattails and things like that. You can see already, even in the Seneca County site where there's water holding in it, you can see some muck and some wetland vegetation or some duckweed filling in with this one as well. So we get some nice habitat. Whenever we're out these sites, we always see raccoon, deer, every type of footprint you can think of. And we know there's birds and frogs all over the place on these things. So these cascading waterways then have that ability to retain water back. That's the idea. Infiltrate it into the ground, reduce sediment, and should uptake nutrients or allow it to root the water differently. And also create a secondary habitat support across the landscape. So they're pretty cool in that regard. But the question obviously is then, do they work? Are they worth that extra cost of building in these retention cells or not? And that's where we partner, Ohio State partners with the Conservancy to look at that. And that's our HABRI project. So what's entitled Understanding the Performance of Cascading Waterways in Ohio Agricultural Landscapes. The team is myself here at Ohio State with a postdoc, Wuhan, Scott, and Kara, who are our grad students, and then Jessica and John at the Nature Conservancy. So that's the group that's been working on this so far. And we also partner with Tim Fox at ODA, if you're familiar with him at all, because he's designed all the systems that we're working on. So he knows everything there is to know about these from an engineering perspective. The major objectives then of the project are twofold. One is just establishing monitoring systems on the constructed cascading waterways. That's where Ohio State does. We're the monitoring on this one, trying to do the science and trying to do a mass balance on the water in and out of them, and also the nutrients and sediments coming in and out of them as well. That's our goal in this type of a project. Then with that information, we're trying to make documentation and communications for outreach and extension for planning, design, implementation, and performance of these structures. That's where we'll partner with the Conservancy. That's their end of it, is trying to kind of get that material processed and pushed out. Ultimately, we're trying to benchmark how these systems are working as we move from the current state, which is they're just a practice, to getting them to become an interim practice for the NRCS, so they can actually get state to get funds, federal funds allocated towards them longer term. But to do that, to move from just a practice to a supported practice or an interim practice, you need to have documentation of efficiency and effectiveness across scale, so they can be designed in a systematic way. So we're trying to benchmark and record data about how these things are working. That's what we're trying to do. Site view. So we're working right now primarily at 4 cascading waterways across the state. Here they are laid out. Again, that Allen County site, Defiance County up by the Dara site, Seneca, and then also Williams County, and that's this Williams County site right here. You can see, again, the system's actually working as the system flows from upstream, far away from us, down towards us. We're at the edge of one of these retention cells. We can see this channelized system, which is how a grass waterway would look during a wet system like this. Flowing through some riprap right here to help maintain the structure for erosion control. Diffuse the flow, flowing into the storage cell where it will sit hopefully until it can be processed. Okay. So what are we doing? What are we monitoring? How do these things look like they're working so far? So in our year 1 of our project, to start off, we've monitored the weather, what comes in for rainfall, what the temperature, what's the energy balance look like for these types of sites. We also put in water level loggers. That's what these hobos are, basically telling us the groundwater level or the water level in each of the retention cells across all the 4 sites we're working on. We've grabbed water samples for chemistry. So we're looking at sedimentation, so total suspended solids and nutrients on these type of water samples. And we've had field cameras out there actually monitoring and measuring and trying to record how these things are working. And so some of the just initial results that we've seen across these sites is, for example, here for the Defiance County site. So these are how these systems are working. So rainfall events are these yellow bars coming down from the top, precipitation here on the right-hand axis. Percentage of basin filled. So for each of those retention cells, if it was 1, it'd be 100% of that cell would be filled up with water. So anything over 1 on this graph is overflow. It's spilling out of the bathtub, right? It's going down to the grass waterway to the next cell downstream. There's 3 cells or basins for this Defiance County site. Red is 3, blue is 2, green is 1. So 3 to 2 to 1. We can see that the 3, the red site, is higher and gets over 1 or cascades before the blue, before the green. So these systems are flowing from the red to the blue to the green. So they're actually probably working how they're supposed to work. The top uppermost cell in the flow fills up and spills over to the next one, which starts to fill up and spills over to the next one. So they are actually cascading physically water downstream as they are designed. We've also noticed that between the events, so we took it here from the start of the cycle on the left-hand side here, as time goes by, they drain out. They drain out by 2 processes. They evaporate water. They literally put water back up to the atmosphere, and they infiltrate water. So that's 2 things that are happening at the same time, and we're monitoring that and trying to get a feel for how fast those 2 processes happen. I'll point out one more thing while we're on this graph, because it'll come through the next one. If you look at the squiggliness, which is the scientific term, how much these lines on the left go up and down versus how squiggly they are on the right, I would argue they're more squiggly on the right-hand side here. Look at that red line, for example. It's really flashy up and down, where it's up here, it's a little bit more stable. We think that has significance. We think that actually is a real feature of these systems. And it's this feature here. So again, this is that Defiance County site now, and we're looking at the water levels and the change per day for these systems. So the dots correspond to the different basins, red, blue, and green again. And we can see that on a daily average, or about every day, up through about August, so this left-hand side here, there's about, 0.2 to 0.3 inches of change every day in water levels. That's roughly on par with this yellow line here, which is the evaporation that could happen in that landscape, a modeled evaporation, or we pulled it in from a data set from our weather stations, basically. So we're basically evaporating water from these cells throughout that period of time. That's when those cells are already filled up with water. As we move to the second half, where those lines got more squiggly, into the September, October period of the year, right? We see this is where the evaporation then goes down, and we leave summer, so that there's less energy for evaporation. But then the change per day starts to go up a little bit, right? We're losing water even faster from those cells. So what do we think is happening there is, as these systems drain out and then wet up again, it's more like the thunderstorm response of them. Once they empty out a little bit after the summer, they drain, they flash it back up again with thunderstorm events. We think what happens is we open up cracks and fissures in them that allow water to infiltrate faster out of them. So if you think about these clayey type soils we'd have in Defiance County, when they're wet, they seal up, hold water really well. And when they're dry, they crack and infiltrates a little bit better. So we have 2 modes of operation, an infiltration and an evaporation period, which will give us different functionality of these systems with time. There's also some subsurface drainage systems here that we could access differently during this later part of the year. So that's pretty cool. We're seeing some physical evidence of how these systems work and how they work throughout time and how that's variable, which is important to understand a little bit. We're also monitoring flow. This is a large flume that my team's putting out there, and this is at the Defiance site as well, to monitor flow of the system. So you can see here wing walls, which will trap the water, route through this bathtub-looking thing, which has a hydraulic control, and we understand the flow through that. And with that, and this is what we're doing now in kind of more in season 2 of this project, is we'll grab water samples with these ISCO auto samplers, basically robotic arms and pumps that pump water into these holding bottles, which sit inside these systems if you're not familiar with them. We'll also measure the flow through this flume. So we're basically trying to track a water balance, how much water flows through these systems. What does that water look like physically, but also what does it look like chemically? So we'll bring those water samples back, run them for the suite of nutrients, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, phosphate, nitrate, ammonia, classic things we would think about in Ohio agriculture, total suspended solids, so sedimentation type things. We'll filter them and look how much materials floating or hanging out suspended in the solution. We'll also look at stable water isotopes, which is something we look at, which helps us partition evaporation and how water fluxes through a landscape. It's a very hydrology type thing if you're interested in that. Then some just initial stuff right here, because we're still kind of in the season, still trying to process it. All the instrumentation's out right now, grabbing how it's supposed to work. Here's one example of what this data will look like. This is a hydrograph, or the flow response for the Seneca County site for a 1-inch storm event. So it rained 1 inch of water over here on the left somewhere. And then here's time over the course of about 24 hours. And here's the flow response, a little small response, and then a very, very big response of water flowing through that system. So here's that, again, a very fast, high rise in the initial phase, and then a recession as the rain stops and it starts to come down, which looks just like a stream would look, right? This is how these systems are working once they fill up with water and start to cascade. So we're measuring those flows. Each red dot here then along these flows is where the ISCO not only measured the flow, it measures it a lot because that's electronic, it also grabbed a water sample. So these are all water samples that have been secured and stored, and then upon retrieval, get sent to the lab where people smarter than me do a lot of chemistry on them. And here's those initial responses to those systems. So again, you can see some timed samples that happened over here on the left. And then here's the chemiograph, the chemical response of that water. So we can start with phosphorus. Total phosphorus is this green dot here. And phosphate then is the open circle. We can see they track together. So the majority of the total phosphorus is the phosphate in the system. And that is a classic, it's a rinsing response. As the flow goes up, the concentrations go up in that system. So you have that first flush of the system, which is very phosphorus in its response. That's how it usually responds. Flush out that field, goes through that system. Counter to that, nitrogen. Total nitrogen is the orange dot up here. Nitrates then is this yellow in the middle, and then ammonia is down on the low end. A dilution response for total nitrogen is also what you'd expect in a nitrogen in an agricultural system in Ohio. We can see that we're characterizing those concentrations and their variability across that event. We'll take those two things together, that flow and that concentration, and we'll get the load. We'll get that nutrient load coming through the system. By taking the upper, what comes into the system, and the lower, what goes out of the system, we can start to put together a mass balance for the water flow through the systems and the nutrient loads through the system. So how much nutrients are they retaining per acre of drainage area, for example, the nutrient yield would be for these systems. That's what we're doing. That's where we're at. We're just getting the data sets going. So a lot of analysis ahead of us still. That will hopefully get to these two objectives of ours, which are, again, establishing that monitoring in those systems, getting a data set together to communicate out so we can communicate to growers, to stakeholders, to agencies across the state, across the region. What's the bang for the buck? How much mass of nutrients are you taking out of the system? How much mass of sediments are you retaining per cost of construction, right? Is there a geographical difference if I'm building it in Defiance County or in Seneca County, or if I'm down in Allen County, right? What's that look like? What's that variability look like? All together goes together to get a base data set. And as we work with folks around the state to build together a case to see if these make sense as an interim practice. All right, that's it in a nutshell. I tried to keep it short because it's summertime. Again, this is my name. I'm Steve Line. Here's my email address. If you have questions that you think of after the fact or you're interested in collaborating on anything like this, we'll probably be going for like years 2 and 3 of this now that we have the infrastructure in place. Feel free to reach out with an email to me. And with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing. And I'll say, I think we have time for questions, time for a chat.
Yes, free. Yes, we do. The question. Thank you so much, Steve. Actually, that's great. Anyone have? Oh, hold on. Let me chat this question. Yeah. Let me see.
I see the chat from Scott is what vegetation was established.
Yeah.
So in the basins themselves, so it's what we've seen is we've seen some reedy things. We've seen some cattails. I'm not an expert in these things. We see some grasses and some vegetation like that. The grass waterways are planted grass, as they would be, but oftentimes get sprayed by farmers, which is one of the management practices. As recommendations go forward, it's hard to say what the recommendation should be. Should it be sprayed or should it not be sprayed? It shouldn't be sprayed. It could be very native, but we've seen a lot of cattails and reedy vegetation that established on the banks of these systems. So they start to look wetlandy. The issues come up a little bit. They hold a lot of standing water, so it gets a little stagnant in the middle. So that's where you get some not as much flow as a wetland would have. So somewhere between a wetland and a grass waterway.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Yeah. So it's mostly like a wetlands type of wet vegetation, just like the one in Bell County, because it was the waterway itself is kind of ponding water, a lot of things. This retention, everything is almost just like a wetlands. It's very hydraulic soil, but
yeah, it'd be a great place for little tiny fish to live. But
yeah, so seems like the 1-inch storm in the Seneca County is quite interesting result, actually. I saw that the PO4 dropped from 0.6 ppm to almost like a 0.25 or something like that. So it's almost like a over 50% reduction in terms of the ORP. That's quite interesting, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that's exactly. So there's a lot of dynamic response happening in that event, right? You see that things move, which is cool. That's always, from my perspective, that's great to see things move. And then we'll take that and we need to take that concentrations with those loads, with the flows, right? To figure out what the mass was, what's the mass reduction look like. But yeah, so seeing the dynamic response is pretty interesting.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of consistent with the the study from the Maryland. That's what
Yeah.
be over 50 or 60% reduction in terms of
Yeah.
the phosphate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a surprising thing we've seen so far in this research to date is in the initial 6 months or a year of it, I thought it was just these things were holding water and evaporating and nothing was really happening. But now we see they're much more dynamic as you go through the end of the season. They are processing that water differently, which is great to see. They are probably having a good impact on the water. Their ability to store water just as a physical storage of water already reduces load. You hold water back, any water back, you reduce the load coming off the field, right? That's how it will work. So it's good to see that that happening at this point.
Yeah. Anyone else have questions? Just feel free. We still got a couple of minutes actually. Yeah.
And it's okay if you don't have questions. You can ask me how my day is going too. My day's going great, by the way. So.
I got a question. I guess I'll just unmute myself and ask. Is there any indication on NRCS's maybe timeline on, as far as making this a practice?
Yeah, we're still real far out. It's like not even on the radar yet type thing. These are like the initial. These are the first data sets for the state. So it's yeah. I don't think it's anytime soon. Would be my easy, quick answer. Sean might have more insight than that, but
Well, I think I got the same thing. Basically, it's still very early stage in terms of this practice. It show a lot of promising result, and then but we wanted to see whether or not these results are consistent. So we can maybe monitor another maybe a couple of years to see it's consistent, that we can more convincing to the NRCS. Okay, this practice is good, actually improving water quality, at least from our research result and across different sites. Actually, yeah, you can see that.
Yeah, so Tracy, yeah, so I don't think it's not coming anytime soon. Working at this speed, it's not coming anytime soon. They look directionally correct is the terminology people usually use, right? They look like they're not gonna make things much worse. And that's one of the backdrops of what we're doing is not just that's the alternative is like, is there any potential they would make water quality worse, right? Doesn't seem like that right now, but we're monitoring them in between the events. We'll monitor those basins, see what the water quality of those basins look like, see if are those flushing out. I mean, are we just processing field runoff, or are we actually doing something in those wetland systems? That's what we'll try to piece that together as well. But so far, they seem like they're improving water quality.
Yeah, and just a comment actually. This year I think so we got an unusual wet springtime, in northwest help. So I think this practice one advantage because the retention cells are gonna holding more water over there. So in the future, if you got a large rain event things, at least you're gonna get extra water or cushion time just to reduce the storm water.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, it's always a question when we're doing any edge of field practice is always, of the alternatives to pick from. This one will work some places because other places wouldn't need it as much. So we need to figure out what the price tag looks like and how it looks relative to the improvement. Always the question. But they're neat. They're definitely cool. It's nothing like walking out in there and seeing a bunch of frogs hopping around, and the deer footprints are always nice to see as well. So, and I like that idea. I mean, the stacked benefits of having some habitat, some things like that, and those variability in the things that you can have for nesting birds and whatnot, waterfowl and whatnot. So, good.
All right. Last, I want to make an announcement. So maybe we are still planning, but later this year in Williams County, we're probably holding a Cascading Waterways Field Day. So talk about the design, some research, and then so just stay tuned with the TNC newsletter then.
Yep. And I know there'll be one in Defiance County as well. At the Dara site, we'll have their field day. And
yeah, they got an act tour
on that as well. So yeah, there's a couple opportunities to go out and see these sites.
Mm-hmm.
Good deal.